All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Katie Burke, and I'm the government strategist at Laserfiche. Today, it is my privilege to introduce Dr. Robert Sobie, but before I hand it off to him, I just wanted to do a bit of housekeeping. We're going to be recording today's session, and we want to make sure that we capture the whole thing in the video. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and I'll deliver a mic to you so that way we can hear you. Just raise your hand, I'll come running. But now that the logistics are out of the way, I'd like to introduce Dr. Sobie. He's the Director of Information Management for Eaton County, Michigan, and he's been recognized several times for his leadership and innovation, including the Michigan Government Management Information Sciences 2012 Technology Project of the Year. Prior to using Laserfiche, Eaton County routed paper manually by walking or driving between 25 different operating departments. With Laserfiche Workflow, the county has been able to automate this activity and streamline the accounts payable process. Today, Dr. Sobie is going to tell us exactly how that was done and share some best practices for those of you who are looking to get started. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sobie.
My goodness, that was excellent. Usually, I just expect something like "Here's Bob," you know, and then I get talking. So I really appreciate, given how late in the day it is, for the number of you that have chosen to come in and hear another presentation about accounts payable. It's amazing how many people are interested in paying bills. You know, that's that process of giving money away, you know, your money, your organization's money, and so on. One of the things that I chose to do very early on was title the presentation differently than maybe some of you may have expected. I didn't title it Accounts Payable. I gave it this, what I think is a somewhat creative title, because an accounts payable workflow operating in my county back in Michigan really is just a ripple. The first step of what we hope will be dozens or perhaps hundreds of steps in helping to transform the county into a better operating agency. So accounts payable is just the start. So that's where the title comes from. The audience, these are the key people I think should be here. If you're not one of these, you're welcome to leave. No, I'm kidding. Please don't. I intentionally left users off of here. Why did I leave users off of here? Any idea? Pardon me? Because they don't matter. No, they do matter, but typically in an organizational hierarchy, the users aren't always fortunate enough to attend a wonderful conference like this, like I am, a little higher up. No. So I've intentionally left them off, but just as a little bit of a play on the importance of users, actually. So here's today's agenda. Basically a little profile about my county. The model that my department operates under is this Making IT Happen model, so we'll talk a little bit about that, not much on it. Transforming government, the accounts payable workflow, which is what you're really here to see. So if you can tolerate me getting through some of the early slides, we'll get to really what's important about accounts payable workflow, okay, and that's the template that helps to trigger what workflow is going to do. And then E, seriously, and a blue ocean future. All right, so Eaton County, Michigan, if you look at that, you'll see the red circle and the star. That's not us. That's the state capital of Lansing, but we are the county seat where my offices are located, are about 20 miles south of there. So just a little short distance. Although the state of Michigan is surrounded by water, Eaton County is not. All right? I often tell some people who are not familiar with the county that usually the only standing water is after a hard rain. Or as it turns out, perhaps this spring, we've been experiencing ice storms and severe snowstorms, so thank you for the invitation to come out here to California and get away from that. What perfect timing. So, the role of my department, the IT department, I prefer to do something more than just have a service orientation. IT is often viewed as a service type of department, and we certainly do that. But I don't always like to follow. Sometimes I like to lead. So I think leadership, IT leadership, and helping the various stakeholders, meaning all of the elected and appointed officials, that we have in the county understand the different technologies that are available, opportunities for integration, and so on, okay? My county does have a population, I know I've moved past it, but does have a population about 110,000. Doesn't sound like a lot. We're kind of a mid-sized county back in Michigan. Of course, we have elected and appointed officials, both. Some elected officials are constitutionally established. A number of appointed officials like myself are there for a specific purpose. 325 to 350 employees, so however that compares to maybe some of your respective organizations. Getting back to the role of IT leadership, partnership, because we really cannot do much without working with the various stakeholders throughout the county, and then of course the service role. But the role of Laserfiche is this: it is a critical business tool to my county. That simple. Again, today we're talking about, we will talk about accounts payable, but it's a critical business tool. That's the role it has to play. But we need to understand what I'm calling, for the purposes of this presentation, this rule of orange number 1. Our vision changes over time. Much like we've heard during this conference, Laserfiche is maturing. It's becoming even more robust than it was 6 months ago. That's that static versus dynamic aspect of the technology. 2009 versus 2012 is important. It's important to my county anyway. In 2009, we first attempted to implement workflow and build an accounts payable workflow model. We were not successful. I'm just going to be honest. We were not successful because the product had not yet matured enough, at least from my IT perspective, maybe not everyone's. It had not matured well enough in order for us to be successful in building and implementing accounts payable. Fast forward to 2012, a new version is released. It has new capabilities that we really needed, and we were able to design, build, and implement a particular workflow to help us out. But this is kind of a segue into rule of orange number 2, don't wait for a crisis. One of the things that was happening in 2012 in my county was yet another budget reduction. And that would mean some more budget cuts. And budget cuts typically affect whom? People, employees, right? Because our personnel or labor costs are really the largest organizational expenditures that we have. Don't wait for a crisis. We apparently in 2012, you know, that perfect storm came together, talk about budget cuts, a new version of workflow that's available, and so on. So we were able to get the necessary funding, build what we needed to build, implement it, and we've been successful since. The phrase I prefer to use in terms of what we're doing is transforming government. We all walk around, and it's perfectly fine, but we all walk around saying, yeah, I'm having to do so much more today, doing more with less, right? But doing more with less implies to me, and if I'm the only one in the room, I understand that, it implies to me that we're going to continue to do or perform the same business functions the same way we've been performing them, just with fewer people. Transforming government, on the other hand, or any organizational type, implies that we're going to rework our business processes, our business functions. So we need to understand what those processes and or practices are. We need to dissect them, and as we do that, hopefully we will all conclude that Laserfiche Workflow is one of the tools that can be used to help us transform the organization. Rule of orange number 4 is we need to understand attitudes. There isn't a single thing that I can build or provide someone unless they want it, right? So wherever you and I are within our respective organizational hierarchies, we need buy-in from those above and those below, right? We need that, but we need to understand the attitudes. I've been working for my county for almost 30 years. This spring marks 30 years and I still can't retire. That's a good thing, right? Okay. So after 30 years, I've experienced situations or events in which attitudes have played an important role in determining whether or not we're able to implement a technology and or whether or not we're successful with that implementation. But once we understood all of those sorts of things, here was our short list of workflows that we wanted to build. Accounts payable was the one that won out. HR onboarding and offboarding, we're just starting to do some work with now, so that's really cool. FLC, does anyone know what FLC stands for, at least back in Michigan? Friend of the court. Do you know what friend of the court does? Collects and disperses child support payments. Okay? Usually it's the men who are paying, so come on guys, if you're doing that, let's step up and own our responsibilities. But the friend of the court operation deals with a lot of money, a lot of people who need that money, a lot of people who don't want to give it up, if you will, but a lot of paperwork. It's part of the court system that operates there. So that was one of the options, and then something dealing with requesting warrants, such as a search warrant, an arrest warrant, and so on. We chose accounts payable because it has such a wide-reaching impact on all county operations. Every single department has bills to pay. So that's what we went with. All right, rule of orange number 5. And this could be lessons learned at the end of today's presentation, but it's here because I want to get it out there. If you're a user, maybe this is another reason why I left them off that list, I'm sorry. Don't disrupt the workflow process, users, by helping workflow move a document from folder A to folder B to folder C to folder D. Don't do that. Workflow is there to do that for you. And just because it's taking a fraction of a second longer today, right now, for that document to move than it did yesterday, that doesn't mean workflow isn't running. Maybe there's a load on the server that's impacting performance or elsewhere across the network. So let workflow do its job. Rule of orange number 6, don't rename those folders. Workflow looks for specific names. Whatever you and I choose to name them, that's what workflow is looking for. And don't reposition those folders within the folder tree that you're using within Laserfiche. Some important features, I'm going to skip the first one, but workflow will notify us if we have outstanding invoices, which means I, as the manager, for instance, I haven't acted on an invoice within a certain amount of time, it will notify me that I need to do that. If I don't do it, it'll notify me again and again and again and again, okay? It will notify us if we've entered an invalid vendor number, meaning that this vendor does not exist in our financial system. So who are they? All right? We can do business with any vendor that we want, but we have to make sure that we get a vendor record created for them. An invalid invoice number generally means that you didn't enter it. And we need that unique number. It's important to connect to our financial system. The totals did not match. I was in an ACE presentation a short time ago this afternoon, and I was fortunate to hear this come up as well, so this is really cool and consistent. If the invoice amount and the amount that I've entered on the template that you will see, please bear with me, if they don't match, workflow will tell me that, and nothing will happen in workflow until I correct that as well. The purge date regarding financial records, generally speaking, at least in Michigan, I don't know if this is true across the country, financial records need to be kept for a minimum of 7 years. That's the time frame that we're applying. At that time, we can dispose of those records. We don't have to, but we can. But rather than going 7 years from the date of each individual document, we've chosen to default our purge date to December 31st, 7 years out. So if an invoice being paid, processed and paid today, it just means that it's going to have a lifetime within our system of 7 years, 11 months. Okay? That's all that means. And of course, a receive date, you know the old stamps? You rotate the dial or whatever you do, and you'd stamp the document received today, and okay. Well, workflow does that for us. Right. The general design concept is this. We wanted to develop a county-wide workflow model to handle accounts payable. Rather than a single workflow, I'll say this as a suggestion. It's preferred that you create a primary workflow, and then when a sub-process of some kind needs to be performed, that you create that as a little workflow that's run, and then when it's completed, you come back to your main workflow. Right. It helps to improve the processing time for what's going on in the back end in terms of a server. Where possible, this was one of our goals, where possible, tell, mandate, require that our vendors provide us with an electronic invoice. Right? If you don't provide us with an electronic invoice, we're not going to do business with you. All right? I can choose to do that. Right? I'm the one that chooses the vendors that my department works with, so we'll do that and make sure that we can improve upon it. At the time this is 2012, at the time we were building the AP workflow, we estimated that the county processes somewhere in the neighborhood of 35,000 invoices per year. That number, I can tell you, has come down by a few. It doesn't mean that we're spending less money. I can tell you that's not true at all. But instead of paying, for instance, for a service contract monthly, we'll pay that annually. So that's one invoice that my department's processing versus 12. Okay? So continue to look for other efficiencies. Common folder naming conventions, you'll see that in a moment come up. And then just a point of clarification that invoices, expense vouchers, credit memos, and credit card receipts are all types of accounts payable documents that require some sort of action. All right. For those of us who are visual, basically, this diagram is simply showing that an invoice comes in however it comes in. Tuesday afternoon, if you were in Nell Thomas's capture session, she presented a number of methods in which documents can get into Laserfiche, right? Scanning them, drag and drop, and so on. It doesn't matter how you get them in there, you have to get them in there. Once the document's there, a few key fields of information are filled out on the template that's associated with that document. Certain actions are taken by the workflow, and so on. Okay? Ultimately, it gets to the accounts payable clerk who's responsible for ensuring that that invoice is going to be paid. Right? The folder design, it looks like it's fairly large on that screen, and I'm trying to avoid taking out my reading glasses after the 30-year remark that I made a moment ago. But the table on the left side is the department folder structure. Okay, they're listed in alphabetical order. There are a few folders there that are just placed there because of some testing and things that we do. The middle section, I chose 3 departments and exploded those, expanded them out. My department's the Information Systems Department. Central Dispatch is our 911 center, and the prosecuting attorney. You may know the prosecuting attorney is a district attorney. Same responsibilities. Apologize. If you look at those 3 boxes, you see a common naming structure being used. The one little caveat that we talked about early on when we were building this model was whether or not we should include the word or some abbreviation for workflow as part of the folder title. You see that there in parentheses. Why did I do that? Why did some want us to do that? So our users would not rename those folders. I don't like it being spelled out the way it is, or I'm sorry, I don't like the abbreviation for department payables. I want department spelled out, and I like that better, so I change it. Well, workflow will not work then for that particular department. Okay? Regardless of the department, all invoices are captured, and they go into that folder called Department Payables Workflow. Once some action is taken based on that template, and I promise you'll see that in a moment, then the invoices will eventually move to the controller's office. That office is the administrative, financial, and HR office for the county. They can have various names, I know, across the country or across the state of Michigan for that matter. And then from there are some subfolders that exist, and so on. Okay? The template design is over on the right. I apologize, it is small, and I am going to need my glasses, but I do know that the first field listed on there is the vendor number. Remember, I can't pay an invoice unless that vendor exists in my financial system, and I need to know the vendor number. What's really cool about the workflow model that we built is when you enter the vendor number, it does a lookup, it performs this lookup in the financial system and will populate the vendor name on the template. So we don't have to actually enter that. And there are several other fields here, including the invoice number. In this case, the invoice number, if you can read it on the big screen, is CC, stands for credit card. PNC Bank is our credit card processing bank. So the controller's office, which is that administrative, did I do that? I hope I didn't. Power outage here in California as well. I left it in Michigan. Here it is. The controller's office requires us as departments to put CC in the invoice number field when we're paying for a credit card transaction. Okay, but generally an invoice coming in through some other means would have a unique number, correct? Okay, all right, that's important. The invoice date, the general ledger distribution total. My goodness, why didn't he just call that the invoice amount? Because that's all that represents. But general ledger distribution total, and then underneath it is general ledger distribution. Those are, that is some terminology that we use in the county, so that's why it's part of the template. Okay. The GL distribution field that you see up there, it has a series of digits, numbers separated by a period and so on. Those numbers represent the accounting number in which the expense will be made from. Okay. The 298 that you see up there, in case you care, happens to represent the computer fund that I make most of my IT investments or acquisitions from. The rest of it you probably don't care about. Okay. A transfer request, sometimes a department needs something, but I don't have the money to provide it. So they will say, I've saved enough in buying blue pens this year that I'd like you to buy me a PC. Wow, it was quite a order of blue pens that you would normally make, right? So they will ask that those funds be transferred to my budget so that I can make the purchase. If this invoice is being paid as a result of a transfer, then we would indicate that here on the template. And then additional accounting codes would be entered as well. Do we want the check returned to the department that's paying the bill or sent directly out? There are some instances where you want the check coming back, right? Most of the time, though, I don't believe that that's the case. An invoice description is optional. It's there for informational purposes only. And then there's a fun piece, and this is the only thing I have to do as the approving manager. And you'll see this on a couple of other slides that come up. All I have to do is approve it or deny it. It's so much simpler than what I was doing before. I'd look at the invoice, I'd study it, I'd scribble on some numbers and sign it and do all of these other wonderful things. Well, now I just have to make a single click. Okay? So the first couple of steps of the workflow, that invoice comes in, it's sitting in a folder called Department Payables Workflow. Where you see the orange dash box, those are the fields that are required in step 1. And I just reviewed some of those, right? The vendor number, it will do a lookup, the invoice number, and so on. Once that information is in there and saved, Workflow knows that you've done something to this template associated with this document, and it will send me a notification telling me that there's a document that requires my attention. Okay? And the only thing I do, and you'll see this coming up in a moment too, is click on a shortcut that's located in an email that I receive. When that document comes up, the template is open. Assuming my memory hasn't failed me, I recognize the expenditure, I choose approved, I'm done. I can do it in a couple of seconds, right? When I say approved, that document is moved from my department's folder over to that incoming payables folder in the controller's office. We're done with it. Okay? When the controller's office gets the template, gets the invoice, they have something or some things that they need to do as well. They will bring up the document. They will verify, which seems a little odd, they will verify that we've coded the invoice correctly, that the invoice numbers match, just do some visual checks like that. If all is good, then the accounts payable clerk will approve the invoice. When the accounts payable clerk approves it and classifies that document as a credit card expenditure or something known as weekly or board, then the document moves to those subfolders. Most of the time, my county, and I believe that this is true with most government agencies, you have a regular schedule in which your bills are paid. So in my county, that's usually once a month. And if I don't submit my invoices by the due date for that month, the invoices will not be paid that month. They will wait until the following month. So you know that net 30 days deal? If I don't get them in, the vendors don't get paid, I may incur some late charges or finance charges as a result of that. Okay? That folder is the board folder. Okay? There are other instances, like this conference begins this week and I have yet to pay for a registration fee, and I'm scheduled to be here to meet all of you wonderful people. So I ask for someone to hurry up and cut the check. That'll go in the weekly folder. Okay? And then we'll get it in, and literally the check's in the mail at that point. Okay? There's a couple of other fields of information on here, but let's keep rolling along. In terms of communication, these are the types of messages that we created. This is entirely up to each of you, but this is what we've created. At the time, and I should point out that a member of my staff is here in the front row helping to cheer me on as I do this. Ashley Bancroft is an important member of my staff because she's the designer, implementer, and supporter of workflow and e-forms and so on in the county and working for me. But she also has this minor responsibility of will you take in the invoices and process them? So she's using workflow. She fills in that first section of the template, and when she saves it, I get an email that says something like this, or it does say this: you have an invoice or accounts payable record that requires your approval. Click on the attached link to access the document directly. No matter who is using this particular workflow, that message is what's sent. It's coming from a workflow account, and we chose through discussions with the controller's office, again, that's that administrative finance HR office, discussions with them that when we said thank you, that rather than saying thank you information systems, that we put in automated workflow administrator. Our auditors also signed off on that and preferred it as well. In fact, this entire process was reviewed by our auditors and they agreed with everything, which is awfully nice, maybe somewhat rare. I should point out that if I find it necessary to deny an invoice, I can choose denied under this DH approval, which stands for department head approval. I deny it, it sends, in this case, Ashley, it sends her an email saying that this invoice was denied. I will place a sticky note on the face of the scanned document stating why. And it isn't a lot of verbiage, it's usually something really short. A possible reason why I would deny the expense is perhaps this purchase was made as part of a grant, a federal or state grant, and when those invoices come in, they go over to a different office for processing. And sometimes I don't always communicate that, in this case to Ashley and or other staff members. So there may be a reason to deny it. Okay. If the accounts payable clerk denies an invoice because something just is wrong, looks wrong or whatever, then we get that feedback loop. We get an email that says accounts payable has denied the invoice. There would be a sticky note telling us why. We'd make the correction and send it through. Right? Now, one of the things that I've found in using this particular workflow is that I would receive email for purchases that we were making on Amazon for $5. I don't have time to deal with issues that involve $5, at least I don't feel like I do. So we changed workflow for my department specifically, but it could have been enterprise-wide, county-wide, that if the invoice is for $100 or less, that it receives an auto approval and moves to the accounts payable clerk for processing. And I can tell you that since making that change, it's cut down on some of those interruptions in terms of email messages. And I'd look and it's Amazon for $2.98 for something, you know, or $16 or whatever. Okay, and I can do that for the main reason that I trust my staff. Right? If I didn't trust my staff and I'm going to micromanage every dollar that's in my budget, then perhaps I wouldn't have included that. But that's the message. Right? A transfer request. If funds are going to be transferred from another department to my department in order to cover this particular expense, this is a sample message that goes out. It says, please transfer a little over $1,000 from the Sheriff's Department budget, a specific general ledger account is listed, to the computer fund to cover the purchase, so on and so on and so on. Okay. The outstanding message where I haven't acted on approving an invoice or denying it, but taking some action against it. Here's a simple little message that's put out there. It happens to occur every Thursday morning at 8:30 a.m., and it basically says the attached invoice is outstanding and requires your approval. Now, I probably should change that to say requires your attention, because it assumes I'm going to approve it. But 99.99% of the time, I think I do. Okay? So, in accounts payable, we throw around these words like efficiency and effectiveness and so on. They're incredibly relevant to workflow, to e-forms, to business processing in general. So we have found that we have reduced our labor costs and some general operating costs as a result of implementing the single workflow. Imagine if I had 24 workflows going or more. Reduced capital outlay costs. At least that bullet item is one of my goals. That I would prefer, do we have any scanner vendors in the room? I would prefer to stop buying scanners, because all of my vendors countywide are submitting their invoices to us electronically, so I don't need to run a piece of paper through a scanner. Okay? That has been a goal of mine for many, many years. At times I win, at times I lose, I guess. And the payment of our financial obligations as a result of implementing workflow, and I apologize, I should have asked for a dollar figure that I could share with you today, but we have seen reduced instances of late charges and finance charges as a result of missing deadlines in terms of paying our bills. I think that alone has helped to justify our use of accounts payable workflow in Eaton County. Okay. So this blue ocean future, that's a phrase, blue ocean, that's taken from strategic planning literature, right? The idea is something that you've all heard of, you know, that blank canvas or blank slate. You can do anything you want with it because nothing's been started. Well, that's the idea with this blue ocean approach. We started with ripples, accounts payable workflow. Now we want to start making waves. Let's get aggressive about what we want to do to transform this organization. We've made the investment in Laserfiche and Laserfiche Workflow and e-forms and so on. Let's get going. If we can think of it, Laserfiche Workflow can do it. Ride the waves of past success. So if you are just starting with workflow, build something simple that might move from one of you to someone else, right? Something simple like a request for time off. Simple. Oh, this works, it saves me a few minutes and so on. It is an opportunity for success. If I were the organizational leader, right, the supreme being or whatever, I would, and then you fill in the blank. That's part of that blue ocean approach that I'm talking about. I can tell you that if I were the organizational leader for the entire county and no one could tell me otherwise, folks, we need to adapt or get out of the way, because we are using public funds, public resources, and we really need to do a much better job in providing our public services. And I think we have plenty of opportunity to evaluate our business processes and find those opportunities to reduce costs, increase efficiency, improve public service, and do all of these other wonderful things. If you'd like some more information, my contact info is up here on the screen. Otherwise, I'd be happy to try and address any questions or react to any comments that you may have.
How do you receive invoices electronically from vendors? Is it like via email or some other method? Is it a generic email account, like an accounts payable email address?
We don't use a generic email account. We could, but usually it's an invoice that's attached to an email. We may also go out to someone like Amazon or whatever and look up our purchase and generate a screenshot from that particular transaction.
Do they always come to the department that ordered the items, or do they come centrally to the accounts payable department? Invoices, I'm talking about.
They would go to the individual county departments. Yep. Now, because I'm the IT department, we purchase a number of items for any department operating in the county, right? So if we place the order for whatever the item happens to be, then those invoices come to us, even though that equipment will be dispersed or installed elsewhere. But if a department like our sheriff's department, if they order something directly, the invoice would go to them. Okay.
Does your workflows interface with the purchase orders and link the invoices to purchase orders and receiving tickets?
You know, I'm so happy you asked that question. I really am, because we do so much online purchasing today using department-issued credit cards that we're really moving away from, and this may be a surprise, but we're moving away from the use of purchase requisitions and purchase orders. There are some instances where a purchase order must be issued. For instance, a purchase associated with a federal grant or a state grant, something like that. But generally, we just don't use them. But one of the reasons why I was in the ACE presentation is I wanted to see the front end that speaks to exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
What kind of ERP system are you using, and does this tie into it in that if you're drilling down and you're looking at a department and you want to see the detail, can you look at the invoice by drilling down in your ERP system?
We don't run an ERP system in the manner or method in which you're thinking, okay? We're not there. But in terms of integration of Laserfiche and the specific documents that we're referring to, they are linked through an interface that my department developed. They are linked to our county financial system. So we can look at those invoices by performing an inquiry on a specific account, general ledger account number, and we can see the invoice that matches that $18 expense or whatever it happens to be. That same interface tool that we built is integrating Laserfiche with other applications as well, such as our jail booking office and records management and so on and so forth. So.
Excuse me, in your outcomes there you mentioned that there was a reduction in labor cost. So does that equal, layoffs, or did anything as far as your employee numbers, did they have to reduce as well?
They did not. Again, some of that early talk in 2012 regarding likely budget cuts and such, the cut that was part of the impetus for getting going on this, that did occur. As it turns out, that particular employee, it ended up transferring to another county department, so that individual is still employed today, but the cut was made where it was expected to be made, and so on. But no one else, no other cuts have been made. You know, I'm a realist that at some point, if workflow types of applications and business process improvements are occurring organizational-wide, being a realist says that at some point someone may, or many individuals may, and as unfortunate as that is, you know, it's part of the evolution of organizational capacity, technology, and so on. So.
On the entry of the invoice information, the metadata fields, are all those just manually keyed in by your department, like the vendor number and invoice number? Or is there any automation? Is there any lookup into your financial system to obtain that?
It's all manually entered, except where required it's manually entered, but again, when the vendor number is entered, then we perform a lookup in our financial system to pull in the vendor name, so that isn't something that has to be entered. Other fields, you know, the approved and denied and so on, that isn't typing, it's a drop-down selection that's chosen. So.
Under your GL distribution accounts, does it allow you to have multiple accounts for a single invoice?
It does, thank you. I should have mentioned that when the template was up there. Any number of accounts can be used to cover that particular expense. And we find that that's common. In my department, we'll order toner for printers, for instance, and we'll order 5 different toners, and one's going to several different departments. And if we're covering that expense, we would code it slightly differently, but yeah, it's not a problem at all. So.
Does it check if you have budget available for those?
You know, that would be sweet. It does not currently, but it's a great idea. The accounts payable clerk, one of the reasons she might deny that invoice is for that exact reason. She will perform a lookup to ensure that the money's there. I will tell you, though, it's too late. The expense has been made. The county is obligated to pay that debt, but the department head will hear about that. So that's the trade-off of not using a purchase requisition or a purchase order, because when those are issued, you've encumbered that expense, right? So you can track it and you know whether or not there are budgeted funds and so on before an order actually goes out. So that's a little bit of a trade-off. Okay, great question.
After approval, like the department head approval, it gets routed to accounts payable, and then what? Is there any, how does it integrate with the financial system to get a check cut?
Currently, it's manually entered, but we have been talking, and I do employ a programmer, but we've been talking with the programmer about moving to the next step where that data could be transferred into the financial system, so that the accounts payable clerk does not need to actually enter it manually. So yeah. Those would be the waves? Those would be some of the waves crashing over the bow, the bow of this workflow ship that we're building. And it's a great point. We're having fun with this, right? But that is that static versus dynamic aspect of what we're doing with Laserfiche and with workflow and so on. And you're all experiencing it as well, right? I mean, we don't live in a static world, or we don't work for static organizations, but we certainly hear about status quo or experience status quo thinking a lot of times. So.
Yeah, would you be able to tell us, in terms of time savings or cost savings that you guys have seen, just what your previous processing time was and what it is now?
Yeah, I don't have data to share. I should have it, but I will say, as the loan representative really from the county in terms of department heads. It takes me seconds to deal with each invoice today where it was minutes before. So can I quantify that over an estimated 35,000 invoices processed annually? Yes. But at the same time, I didn't acquire, or my county didn't make the investment in workflow solely for payables. That workflow technology is there for anything that we want to work with, HR and criminal justice and court systems and so on. So I think over time we will find that payoff is substantial. But I apologize, I don't have actual data to share. So.
Hi. Is the reason you're not pushing and pulling data from your finance system, is there some difficulties there, or is that just something that you guys still need some work on?
No difficulties at all. It's simply a matter of committing the programmer that I have, the only programmer that I have, to doing that work amongst dozens and dozens of other pressing project priorities. So we will get there to do those sorts of things, and we're just, it just isn't there currently. So, but there are no issues or technical or otherwise that would prevent us from doing it. Okay.
Is this solely done with workflow, or are you using the business processes within the workflows?
I believe it's workflow. It's, at this time, it's workflow. The HR work that we're doing, however, is a combination of eForms, workflow, and business process. Okay.
Any other questions? Anyone I'm missing? All right, well, thank you so much.
Thank
Dr.
you, I
Sobie.
appreciate it. Thanks so much. Thanks.